Well, hello, good afternoon, good morning to some of you, and welcome to our first Q&A session on the non-habitual special tax regime in Portugal. My name is Claudia Vasconcelos. I am the Head of Business Development at NEWCO Corporate Services. For those who are not familiar with us, we are a one-stop shop for investors and expatriates in Portugal and a corporate services provider in Malta. We have 30 years of experience and a multidisciplinary team that covers a wide range of services from immigration, company and business setup, real estate and relocation services, as well as personal and corporate accounting and tax compliance services, among others. I invite you to learn a little bit more about NewCo and our services in our website and our social network. And if you like to keep pace and are interested in learning more about relevant topics and updates on living and investing in Portugal, Madeira, and Malta, please feel free to subscribe our newsletters and follow our social media. I am very pleased to note that our first Q&A session today received more than 100 registrations and over 60 questions. This shows the interest, but also the many doubts that the special tax regime on non-habitual residents in Portugal still raises today, more than a decade after it was created. In fact, this tax regime has been instrumental in attracting new tax residents to Portugal. However, we have noticed and still notice among many of our clients that many people take decisions without the right or adequate information and are very often unaware of the true tax impact that this regime may have in their personal and specific case. There is a lot of information online about the advantages of the tax regime. This generates a false sense of security. It is, in fact, a complex regime that depends a lot on the intrinsic variables of each person and particular circumstance, as we will understand and see better from Roberto's comments to all the questions that you've posed today. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Roberto, a lawyer in our team. Roberto is a tax lawyer in our team that joined NewCo after having spent several years as a lawyer in law firms in Lisbon and also in Luxembourg. Roberto holds a degree in law from Universidade Nova de Lisboa, a master's degree in tax law, and a postgraduate degree in tax litigation, both from the Catholic University, the Portuguese Catholic University. I'm sorry. He is active in all areas of tax law, notably in what concerns the taxation of inbound and outbound investments in Portugal, but also in other areas such as tax litigation, real estate taxes, and high net worth individuals. Roberto is the author of several publications, a local correspondent of the International Bureau of Fiscal Documentation, and a member of IFA, the International Fiscal Association. Roberto, I'm sure our guests are looking forward to your comments on the various questions raised, so the floor is yours. All set?
Is everyone
Roberto?
hearing me?
Yes.
Everyone is hearing? Okay, thank you. So, thank you everyone for taking your time today to speak about taxes, which is sometimes not the most pleasant topic of all, but I believe that this particular topic of the non-habitual resident is very interesting, complex, but extremely attractive for those that intend to relocate to Portugal. As Claudia said, we received a huge number of questions. Unfortunately, we are not able to answer all of them today, but I will try to address all of them, or at least the ones that I will not answer on this webinar by email. This is an open formula. This is our first webinar, our first Q&A. So we'll start today with some of the basics. I understand that some of the information may be too basic for some, but we need to first, or at least we opted to settle, to put the level, to reach a level playing field for everyone, so that in the next webinar we can address more complex issues. Although sometimes the matters that look more simple are the most complex, as we will see. So without further ado, I will start reading the questions and then we'll address them one by one. Of course, for data protection issues, we did not state the entire name of the person that asked the question, just the first name. But I hope that you find the questions useful, at least for your better interpretation or for better understanding of what is this thing called the non-habitual resident. So let's start. Two questions raised by Wendy. First one is when do we start becoming tax residents? This looks like a very simple, straightforward question, but the point is that the process can be different in case you are an EU resident or in case you don't have an EU passport. In case you are, like many Ukrainians, you are the holder of a temporary protection regime. So this can change. The exact timing can change. What we can say in a nutshell is that you become tax resident as from the moment that you register as such with the Portuguese tax authorities. The point here is that sometimes we have seen this with our clients. People register as tax residents in Portugal without knowing. Some, for instance, when applying for the tax ID number, request the Portuguese tax identification number, register themselves with the local address of someone that they know, and start becoming tax residents. Others, like the Ukrainian refugees with the temporary protection scheme, become tax residents without most of times knowing. So basically what counts is the registration that is before the Portuguese tax authority. So you start becoming tax resident as from the moment that you register as such, either by giving an address, a Portuguese address, that you can do at the local tax office or not, or well, providing any address, Portuguese address to the tax authorities. What this brings is that with the tax residency, you become subject to tax on your worldwide income. So this is very important. And when should we apply for the NHR status? Well, what we advise our clients is that you apply for the NHR status as soon as you become a Portuguese tax resident. Truth is that you have until the 31st of March of the year following the one in which you became tax resident to register as an NHR. But for the avoidance of any issue that may arise, we advise our clients to register as an NHR as soon as possible and as soon as they register as an NHR. We have seen lots of cases of clients that mistakenly do not comply with this deadline of the 31st of March of the following year. And it's particularly troubling when that happens. There is case law, recent case law, where applicants managed to register themselves as tax residents further to a decision of the arbitration courts, of the Portuguese tax arbitration courts, but it's definitely not advisable because it will take time, it will have costs. So always be aware of this deadline, 31st of March of the year following the one in which you register as tax resident to register as NHR. If you register as a tax resident today, 6th of June 2023, you will have until the 31st of March of 2024 to register as NHR. How long do I need to live in Portugal to be able to apply for the NHR? Asks Carlos. Carlos, the question here is more on the opposite, is how long you must have not lived in Portugal to be able to apply for the NHR. Under the NHR, you must have not been a tax resident of Portugal in the previous 5 years in which you apply for the status. So sometimes this does not happen for reasons that we will address further down below this webinar. But the important point here and what you need to retain is that on the Portuguese tax authorities, there must be a register of you as non-resident in the previous 5 years to the year in which you apply for the status. Pedro asks, to qualify for the NHR, is there an application and approval process to fall under this regime? Well, in the old days when I started working, and I'm not that old, I promise, but there was a a complicated or at least burdensome process to this. You would need to send the application to the Portuguese tax authorities, then they will approve or not. Well, this has been simplified some years ago. And nowadays the process is online. It's based on the information that the tax authorities have. And in case, as I said, you have not been resident in the tax authorities in the previous 5 years and you have a Portuguese address and you are registered as a Portuguese tax resident, then you can apply online for the status, and in principle it will be granted in a matter of 24 hours. There's no longer the burdensome regime that was in place some years ago. Does the contract need to be with an external company? On this case, I suppose that Pedro was referring to the high added value activity and the employment income, for instance, that you may receive from an external company, and that can be able to benefit or not from the special 20% tax rate applicable to high added value activities. And the answer is no. It can be with a local Portuguese company or an external company. It's irrelevant for those purposes. The most important part here is the activity that you exercise. How can a company be made comfortable that the taxes retained on my salary is at the right level? This is something that we do at our firm. We have had several questions by clients that have companies that have hired people with the high added value activity, with a high added value activity, and they want to know and want to have more comfort on whether they can apply the 20% flat tax rates on withholding tax instead of the progressive tax rates and standard rates. The point is, well, there's no 100% question or 100% certainty on this, because the list of high added value activities was created several years ago when the world was different and we didn't have so many dematerialized professions, so such a broad range of activities. So basically, we sometimes go to the very basics and to the very simple things that the activity of the professional entails and what he does, and we try to find consistency and similarities in the Portuguese list of high added value activities. It's not an easy work sometimes because you really need to go into the details and dive into what is the effective output of the profession. But what we do is an analysis that basically, under the reasonable interpretation of the tax law, we understand that that is correct, and that can provide comfort to our clients, both when our clients are companies, which is many times the case, or if our clients are the employees, which also happens. So basically, there is no 100% certainty, because that can only be given by the tax authorities, but we try to provide a reasonable interpretation under the applicable provisions that the 20% flat tax rate can apply. Jose asks, I read worrying news about the persecution of the Spanish treasury to citizens who move to Portugal and pay less taxes. I would like to know your opinion about the Spanish retirees who intend to stay and live in Portugal. Jose, the Spanish tax authorities indeed have become quite famous lately because of the cases of people as Shakira, as Neymar, so many famous that have had issues with the Spanish tax authorities. This is, I must say, a matter that should be seen with the Spanish tax advisor. From a Portuguese perspective, the tax authorities in principle won't challenge your Portuguese tax residency. Although they may have grounds for it, in principle, it will not happen. But from a Spanish perspective, you must protect yourself against any questioning. What we advise our clients is to keep a track record of your residency. You should gather invoices of your utility bills. If you go to the gym, if you have your kids in a Portuguese school, gather all that information to prove and to build your case in case you have any questioning. Because we know, although we always try to go by the book, there are some that want to be registered in Portugal as tax residents to have the benefits, but they continue, they live all their and make their lives and have their main place of interest in Madrid or in any place in Spain. And those are the cases where there can indeed be issues, because nowadays we have big data, we have the common reporting standard, we have the automatic exchange of information, and so the authorities have all the means to, or at least have more means that they had in the old days, to challenge your tax residency. So we definitely advise you to keep all the documents and build your case in order to, in case of questioning, in order to have all the information at your disposal and be something that you can provide to the Spanish authorities, because you are in the freedom, in the free will of establishment, and you are entitled to live in Portugal. You are able to live in Portugal, so you just have to be able to demonstrate to the Spanish authorities that, look, I do not reside in Spain, and I have moved my life to Portugal, and these are the documents that sustain this change. We have had, Spain is not the only jurisdiction that has had issues with especially with the retirees. The most relevant, I would say, are not even from Spain. We have the case of Finland and Sweden that even revoked the tax treaty that they had with Portugal. But since then, Portugal has introduced the 10% flat tax rate over the pension income for NHRs, also to address those points. But it is indeed an issue that deserves attention and that we advise our clients on. Eliseo asks, if I enter the NHR residence scheme, do I have to pay taxes for income abroad? Do you have to declare or pay taxes for income abroad? Well, with the Portuguese tax residency entails the worldwide tax liability in Portugal. This does not necessarily mean that you will pay taxes in Portugal over your worldwide income, though that will be determined by the applicable tax treaties or the NHR status, whatever. But you must declare them in your personal income tax return. My activity is related only to real estate ownership. Am I taxed for rentals from property, capital gains from sale of property, taxes to property ownership abroad? In Portugal, we have no general wealth tax, contrary to some countries like Spain. So there will be no taxes over your property ownership in Portugal, assuming it's real estate. There are only taxes on the property ownership of real estate in Portugal. And the other types of income that you mentioned, in principle, will be exempt in Portugal under the NHR. Do I need to declare my property abroad? No, there is no need of declaring the property abroad. I'm assuming it's real estate, for example, but you do need to declare the IBAN of your bank accounts abroad. You must declare them in the Portuguese tax return. It's only the number, only the IBAN, not the amount the amounts that you have there deposited, but you need to declare it. And the Portuguese tax authorities, under the international tax agreements, exchange information on that. If I enter the NHR scheme, is there a minimum amount of days that I am required to live in the country? Well, theoretically, you should stay in Portugal at least 183 days to be considered a tax resident herein. There is also the other criteria, which is having a place of residency with the intention of keeping them as your permanent abode. So you basically need to look at your status, see how many days you stay in Portugal and how many days you don't stay in Portugal, and under the applicable Portuguese tax residence rules, determine if you are a resident in Portugal in that same year, because it's fundamental to apply the NHR. Deborah asks, which type of income are exempt under the regime? Does the country need to effectively tax the income in order to have it exempt in Portugal? Well, on the first, dividends, capital gains, royalties are exempt in Portugal, and all that is necessary is that the applicable tax treaty provides that the country of source is allowed to tax the income under the applicable tax treaty. This does not mean that it needs to be taxed in the other country. There are exceptions. For instance, for employment income, there is the need of having it taxed in the outside of Portugal in order to have it exempt here. So it's a matter of looking at the type of income. Generally, passive income, there is only the requirement of having the possibility of taxing it outside of Portugal under the applicable double tax treaty. Will I have to set up a company structure, or can I continue to trade as an individual? Well, this question is not particularly on NHR issues, but it's something that we receive a lot. Well, in Portugal, there is a federal tax regime that is not related with NHR for individual entrepreneurs. Under certain activities, you may benefit from a simplified tax regime under which only 75% of your income is considered and the rest is deemed as expenses. You also have certain reductions of your taxable income on the first 2 years of activity. So what we do with our clients on these questions is basically weighing the pros and cons of each option. For some, a company may be worth from the beginning. For others, it may be useful to start as an individual or an individual entrepreneur and then set up a company down the road because of this set coefficients that apply to individual entrepreneurs over the course of their activity, and particularly in the first 2 years. This is something that we do with our clients, and it does not impact for the case of the NHR. You don't need to set up a company structure to benefit from the NHR, Jonathan. Jose and others, this question came up several times. I believe there were almost 10 questions like this one, so I would say that it's something that requires a special attention. I'm Portuguese. I have been a tax resident in the UK for the past 10 years and living there. And I'm waiting since January 2023, date when living in Portugal, for my NHR request tax permit from the Portuguese tax office. Despite several claims, the request is still to be approved. I have submitted many documentation, residence permit in the UK, for how many years, yearly tax letter, and I'm a data consultant. Well, to Jose and the others that put this question, this is indeed an issue, because what happens, hopefully this will change in the future because people are becoming more sensitive on the importance of tax residency. But some years ago, people would change their residency, would go to live in another country, and wouldn't remind or wouldn't be immediately in their heads the topic of changing their residency before the Portuguese tax authorities. So what happens a lot is that people, some years after, come back to Portugal, want to benefit from the NHR. They go to the tax authorities and they are registered as tax residents of Portugal since forever. The only way to correct this is to start an administrative procedure that can indeed be a bit burdensome, that requires time, that entails costs. What Jose has done is completely correct. It's all that you can do. You must start the procedure with the tax authorities and submit certificates of tax residence in each of the years in which, each of the preceding 5 years, in order to be able to benefit from the NHR. And apart from the certificate of tax residence, tax returns in which you have declared yourself as resident, in this case, in the UK. This requires paperwork and requires time because, as you can imagine, the tax authorities are overwhelmed and overburdened with the complex processes, and the time to answer these requests can be of several months. Our experience is that indeed it can take several months, but that in most cases, when the taxpayer provides sufficient evidence, such as the tax returns and the certificates of tax residence, the correction is granted and the prospective beneficiary is attributed the NHR status. However, this is it's a bit, I understand that it can be a bit frustrating because it will take several months, but all that we can advise is to be patient and wait. And according to our experience, it's solved in a matter of months, and usually there's no need of going into further terms of tax litigation or whatsoever. And it's solved at an administrative level by the tax authorities. So all you have to do, unfortunately, at this stage, is to wait and just wait and see for the answer of tax authorities. Pablo asks, how is tax for a tax credit in Portugal applying the NHR, the capital gains obtained abroad derived from a transfer of shares of a startup or other entity? Is there any exemption in capital gain? In case affirmative, which are the requirements to fulfill? Well, in this case, to the extent that the Portuguese and the Spanish tax treaty provides that the capital gain can be taxed in Spain, Portugal will exempt it. You should see if Spain will provide any sort of tax, but in Portugal it will be exempt under the NHR. There is no impact on the point that it's a startup entity or not. It's treated as any other entity. Christophe asks, if I choose to relocate to Portugal on the NHR, how will dividends paid in France by a French corporation operating in the French market will be exempt in Portugal? Would these be solely taxed in France? The answer is yes. In Portugal, it will be exempt, similarly to the case before. In Spain, on this one, it will be exempt, provided the tax treaty gives France the possibility to tax it. It will be exempt in Portugal, and that is the case. Can we apply to this tax regime if we are an employee with a contract working remote from Portugal for a company based in another European country? Yes, to the extent that you have registered as a tax resident in Portugal, you can indeed apply this tax regime. The other point is on the obligations that the non-resident entity will have in Portugal, because it will have an employee in Portugal and you have to comply with certain obligations, for instance, in terms of social security and on withholding tax. This is a service that you actually provide, which is the payroll service to non-resident entities that have workers in Portugal. What is needed to apply for a digital nomad visa and what are the requirements for it? Well, this is, of course, not an NHR question, although we do take care and we have an intense activity in this visa part and in the residence permits. I suppose that here you are mentioning the digital nomad visa that applies for 1 year and can be subsequently renewed for another year. And you ask, what are the tax implications of having this visa? Well, the point here with the so-called digital nomads is that they often are residents. They are not residents anywhere. Well, because they are, or they don't want to be tax residents of anywhere. They are residents for 1 month in a given country, for another month in another country, and then another month in another country. So the tax implications from a Portuguese perspective will depend on the Portuguese residence tax rules. So we need to look at the residency rules and see whether you will be framed. We will be framed under these provisions. In principle, if you stay less than 183 days and you don't have a residency here with the intention of having it as your permanent abode, it won't have Portuguese tax implications. But in case you have the digital nomad visa and you stay here for 1 year, yes, you trigger Portuguese tax residency and you must deliver a tax return in Portugal, you must declare your worldwide income herein, and so you will have tax implications. The point is, you can apply for the NHR regime, but you will only benefit for it for 1 year. You can suspend it, but the window to benefit from the NHR regime doesn't move. It's the 10 years you can suspend, and restart it, but it will be always in the said window of 10 years. So this is something that should be really seen on a case-by-case basis, and we have seen, particularly since 2020, a huge surge in digital nomads coming to Portugal, to Madeira. In our specific case, we have a detailed experience on that. And the point is exactly this. It depends, even though you have the digital nomad visa, it's not necessarily the case that you will stay here for 12 months. So in case you stay less, we need to see it on a case-by-case basis and analyze it under the Portuguese tax residency rule. So it's not a straightforward question. Who has an offshore to invest and trade crypto? Is Portuguese NHR regime a good option? In other words, will the gains or the balance of the offshore be taxed? Well, Portuguese has enacted a recent regime that applies to crypto assets. And Portugal is also a country that, probably the country that has most provisions in its own tax regime, covering income arising from offshore entities. On the specific case of holding crypto assets through an offshore structure, I believe there are limited gains on having it, because Portugal has a very interesting crypto asset regime under which crypto exchanges are not taxed. Only the exchange for fiat currency is taxed, and only crypto assets held for less than 1 year are taxed. In case the Portuguese legislation foresees this, in case the crypto assets and the crypto income is paid from an offshore jurisdiction, this exemption for assets held for more than 1 year does not apply, so you will be taxed, and you cannot carry forward losses, which is possible under the standard regime of crypto income received from a standard jurisdiction. So in my view, there are limited benefits of having crypto assets through an offshore structure. You will have more benefits holding it and receiving income through a standard onshore jurisdiction, because you have this beneficial crypto regime that actually is not. This question is also far from the NHR, but I believe it's relevant because we have so many crypto investors, and most of them are not aware that we have this recent regime since January that is so beneficial, as I said, that exempts the gains when you have the crypto for more than 1 year, and has, let's say, what stays in crypto, which basically entails that crypto for crypto exchanges are not taxed, and only crypto for fiat currency are taxed, depending on the case, and also exempts, for instance, NFTs, which are not considered as a relevant crypto asset for the purposes of personal income tax. An NHR beneficiary obtaining employment income in another country and paying tax therein must declare and pay the income in Portugal. Well, the point here is that most tax treaties provide that the employment income should be taxed in the country of residency of the employee, which in this case it will be taxed in Portugal. And on this case, Sandra asks, what will be the applicable tax rate? Well, in case you are taxed in Portugal, which most likely will happen, you have two different regimes that can apply. Either the 20% flat tax rate that apply to high added value activities, or the standard Portuguese personal income tax rates that can go up, that are progressive, and can go up to 48% plus a 5% solidarity rate, which provides for an aggregated rate over employment income of up to 53%. So basically what you need to do is, when you are taxed in Portugal on employment income, determine or check whether you fall under the high added value criteria. If you fall, perfect, 20%. If you don't fall, progressive tax rates of up to 48%, and added of a 5% of solidarity tax that can go up to 5%. Rodrigo asks, what are the main impacts on the changes of the Golden Visa program? And if a Golden Visa is still possible to be applied to, how long the entire process is taken? Well, this is very, I chose this question because of this simple sentence. The NHR is a tax regime. The Golden Visa, the Digital Nomad Visa, all that sort of stuff is a residency permit regime. So it's not related. Of course, a residency permit can have tax impacts, but the NHR is a tax issue. It's not a residency permit. It's not anything whatsoever. We have indeed several questions about the Golden Visa, but the Golden Visa is another thing. Golden Visa, as many of you may know, is likely to end in the foreseeable future. There is an ongoing discussion in the Portuguese Parliament. Currently, the parliamentary discussion is ongoing, and there can be amendments in the sense of having, let's say, a special regime for certain regions, such as Madeira, Azores, or inland territories, but we don't know at this stage. There is interest, particularly and public interest from the Madeira government, to have a special golden visa regime applicable for more time here in Madeira, but actually we don't know. How long the entire process is taken? Well, we basically don't know what will happen. The parliamentary discussions may still take 1 month to 1 month and a half. We don't know. But in case you apply, and you can still apply until that time, until the publication in the Portuguese official gazette, you can still apply, and the process can take more than 1 year for sure, as from the submission of the request. In case I am an AHR in Portugal, what will be the tax treatment of a donation to a son? This is not, the fact of being an AHR does not have any implication on this, because the good news is that Portugal does not tax donations to ascendants or descendants or immediate family. So it will be completely exempt in Portugal, except in the case of if it's real estate, you will pay 0.8% of stamp duty. But for a donation of, well, anything except from the real estate, it will be exempt when it's the case for a son. For someone that is passing down the street and I donate anything, well, there is a 10% stamp duty rate that applies to donations. But in Portugal, one thing that mixes well, and it does not mix, but it's a good addition to the NHR, is that we do not have a general wealth tax or a gift tax in Portugal. Will I continue to be liable to wealth tax in Spain in case I take Portuguese tax residency and obtain the NHR status? Well, this is a Spanish tax question that you should seek clarification with a Spanish tax lawyer. From a Portuguese perspective, as I said, we do not have a wealth tax, and we will not tax any assets that you have in Spain just over having. Portugal may tax income, not the simply wealth. My main source of income are dividends received from Uruguay. Are they exempt in Portugal? This is a very good question by Roberto M. It's not me, I promise. Although I'm Roberto Mendonça, but it's not me. Uruguay, the thing is that Uruguay is an offshore jurisdiction for Portugal. We have a huge list of offshore jurisdictions, more than 70. And for that, if we're only looking at that, we would tax dividends received from Uruguay at 35%. But there is one important point here, is that we have this strange thing of having tax treaties with countries that we blacklist. And so we have had this question, and this has been discussed in the tax courts on whether we could apply the exemption under the NHR to a country such as Uruguay, that we blacklist and that we have a tax treaty with, and we have decisions and understandings from the tax authorities under which it may be exempt in Portugal. The decisions were about Hong Kong and United Arab Emirates, and they provided for the exemption in Portugal when you are an NHR. If you are not just out of curiosity, if you are not an NHR, you will have to look at the tax treaty. And in case there is a tax treaty, Portugal officially accepted to restrict its ability of taxing that income, so it will be restricted for the case of dividends to the applicable tax rate of the tax treaty. In case there is no tax treaty, well, which is not the case of Uruguay, as I said, it will be a 35% rate, which is highly, it's really huge. I heard that the 20% flat rate currently applicable to independent professionals was going to be removed by the Portuguese state. Is this true? If yes, it will apply already in 2023. Well, Jose, I don't know where you saw this, but it's definitely not true. It's not. There are no plans whatsoever of removing it. I'm not aware. I'm not 100% sure whether there was even any proposal on that by a party with representation in the Portuguese Parliament, but it's definitely not in the plans, and it will continue to apply in 2023. And there are no official plans to cancel it. So the 20% flat tax rate will continue to apply to those activities that have a high added value under the applicable Portuguese tax provisions. What can happen is that as the time goes by, the Portuguese tax authorities will progressively start monitoring the high added value activities. Will start asking questions on whether profession has indeed a high added value activity under its arm. So it will be important to check in the upcoming years the position of the Portuguese tax authorities on that point, and what questions do they raise, and whether we can reach a common line of interpretation of what is within the scope of the high added value activity or not, because there is always an open ground for interpretation on the list and on the applicability of the list. So, but yes, it will apply in 2023, and you can expect just in the future more questioning of the tax authorities, because as I said in the beginning, the NHR back in the old days was something mainly for retirees that will come to Portugal and enjoy some sunny times on their retirement. But nowadays, digital nomads, professionals coming to Portugal are increasing vastly. So this will be something that will definitely be on the headlines in the upcoming months, in years. If I take up citizenship after 6 years of NHR, would the rest of the 4 years be void once citizenship is approved? It's a question by Viv. Viv, it's once again, the NHR is a tax regime. The fact that you are a citizen of Portugal after the 6 years, it's not an issue. The NHR does not make a discrimination under the citizenship. So in case you become Portuguese or anything else, it's not relevant for the purposes of the NHR. You must just ensure that you remain a tax resident of Portugal. And capital gains from the disposition of real estate located outside of Portugal. Are there any advantages under the NHR? Well, in principle, you have to look at the tax treaty. To the extent that the tax treaty provides that it can be taxed outside of Portugal, it will be exempt here in Portugal, but you really need to do a case-by-case analysis. So in a general question, although most tax treaties provide that it will be taxed in the place, it will be taxed outside of Portugal, or that it can be taxed outside of Portugal, which is slightly different, it must be really seen on a case-by-case basis. And I believe this is, in the end, this was the last question. Let's say this trail that we went through on the NHR really demonstrates that we need to do a case-by-case analysis, and that there is really no one size fits all. I say this several times per week or even per day, because it's the truth. It's not ourselves being greedy. It's the fact that the system and the tax reality is complex. Nowadays, with so many sources of income, so many types of income, new realities such as crypto assets, such as high added value activities, and everything that's put together, bring complexity, and you are always highly advised to seek proper tax advice. I believe that you have heard from me enough today. We'll pass the word to Claudia, and I hope I have clarified some important points in your mind. I will, as I said, try to answer the most I can by email, and my contacts and the ones of Claudia are on your screen. So feel free to reach out, and thank you for your time and for listening to me today. Claudia, please.
Thank you, Roberto. I think you've covered most of the questions, right? I believe, Roberto, you've covered most of the questions. I understand about 60% of the whole questions raised. Many of them were, or the ones that were not directly answered, Roberto tried to include and answered indirectly, so they've probably been covered as well. But as Roberto explains, he will be providing and or sending an email to those that have remained unanswered. And feel free to use our contacts in case you want a more in-depth and personalized assessment that as we recommend. Thank you for being with us today. This event has been recorded, so we'll also be sending a recording back to you. Thank you. It was a pleasure having you here today. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.